Hey, what's up? It's Kit. Time for another video. Today we're going to be talking about fast and slow jigging reels. This is not brand specific, and your takeaway after this video is that you would better understand what they're used for and why. Perhaps it'll also give you a clear understanding so that when you go to the tackle shop to set up either a fast jigging or a slow jigging setup, you'd be able to identify and pick which reel you need. Now, there's a certain dynamic that actually happens between the rod, the reel, and the jig. So in order for you to understand why you need this type of reel and that type of reel, we have to talk about the differences and the similarities of slow and fast jigs. Fast jigs and slow jigs. They are heavy. Some of them are quite heavy, some of them are quite light. They're both designed to be dropped down. With a fast jig, there are certain ways to actually impart action on the jig, and there's only one thing that you actually have to realize. The fish only bites the fast jig when it's in the horizontal position. Okay? So the time when the jig is actually at in a horizontal position, or if it's rocking like that, that's the time when the fish bites it. It's not like when it's like that. Okay, sometimes you'll catch a fish with the whole jig inside the mouth. Okay, quite rare, but most times you'll catch the fish only in the horizontal position. Now, when the Japanese actually found out that the fish only bite it in the horizontal position, they invented the slow jig, because hey, what if you had a jig that is horizontal majority of the time? And slow jigging was invented. So that's basically the relationship between the two. But there's something that you need to realize, okay? As far as fast jig and slow jigging are concerned, they're basically kind of the same, only they're going in different directions. So the action of the fast jig is going up. So it's moving, going up, because on the way down, it just goes straight and there's no action. Whereas with the slow jig, it goes down, flutters, okay? And for you to actually impart action, it's either you have to pull, it goes up, and then it gets slack, and then it has its action. So its action is mainly when it's going down. So if you think about those two things, with how a fast jig moves and how a slow jig moves, you immediately can see that there's kind of a different approach to each. Okay, so with a fast jig, you need a slow retrieve reel, and for Shimano's, it's the PG version. Okay, so these are slow retrieve reels because what you want or what you need is actually a reel that would give the lure or the jig its action, but not pull it up really fast. Now, this equates to having your jig stay in the strike zone longer, whereas with the slow jig, it's already in the strike zone most of the time. If you want, you can let it stay in the strike zone for as long as possible, or as long as you want it, really. All you have to do is just give it more line and then jig it back up. And that's the advantage of the slow jig. It would be able to stay in the strike zone with the desired action for as long as it takes. Whereas with the fast jig, it actually moves up, and that's the only way it'll get action. So you have to open your bail, drop it down, or flick the gear and drop it down again and start the process. Whereas with the slow jig, you're continually and always there. Now, with the fast jig, as mentioned, you want it to stay in the strike zone for as long as possible, so you need a reel that retrieves the line slower. Whereas with the slow jig, you want a reel that's fast so that it can pick up slack and you're always in contact with the jig. Now remember, you're already always in contact with the jig with a fast jig because you're retrieving it with, with the jigging motion. What the slow jig also needs is that the reel is fast enough to be able to reel in all the slack and the stretch of the line. Now we'll talk more about the line in a later video, but in a nutshell, that's basically why you need a slow reel for your fast jigging and a fast reel for your slow jigging. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but there is really a reason for all that. I have a spinning setup and I have a narrow spool conventional reel. Now when I'm fast jigging, when I use spinning reels, I usually reel with the left. Okay, but the reason why I have a conventional that reels with the right is that when I get tired of this, I could just switch to the other hand, okay, and go on with my jigging. So that's one very good reason. The other is that for long jigs such as these, the spinning rod actually gives it a slight pause on the retrieve, and that gives it more time in the horizontal position for long jigs specifically. But for shorter jigs, I use the conventional, okay? And since it's a direct contact with the spool, you would be able to pull easier with the conventional than with the spinning setup, at least for me, okay? Most important for me is actually the length of the handles. So in particular, you can move the handle shorter or longer. I set it at long, but it's still not as long as my slow jigging setups, which I'll explain later on. Okay, so that's my fast jigging setups. Now for slow jigging setups, I use an Osha Jigger 1500. This is 90% of my use right here. Okay, it's a fast retrieve reel. As mentioned earlier, the more you drop deeper, the more you need to retrieve line, because there's longer stretch, or there's more stretch, and also because your line actually forms a D. And when that D forms, remember you're dealing with a drifting boat and current. So when that D forms, you want a really fast reel to reel up all this stretch and all that slack so that you'd always be in contact with your jig. So I have a longer handle to give me better control and leverage, okay? You don't have to do that, but I've noticed that with a longer handle, I actually get more control. When it's really short, it's good when you're reeling in fast, but when you're dropping down in deeper water, you want that extra bit of control and easier to reel. When you have a fish on, it also helps you a lot because it gives you, like I said, a bit more leverage. So it works better for me. You don't have to go out there and buy a handle. These things are actually kind of expensive, but if you can, and as soon as you put it on, you'll feel the difference. It's just a world apart. Especially on my slow jigging reels, I actually put the longest handle I could find. This is a Studio Ocean Mark, and yeah, it works great. So you'll also notice that for my slow jigging reels, I have wide spooled reels. I don't have, and both conventional. A lot of people actually kind of have a problem when they first switch over to slow jigging or use slow jigs with their setups, and they immediately notice that on spinning rods and reels, it takes forever to drop down. Now the reason for this is because slow jigs, as I've mentioned earlier, are designed to go horizontal as soon as you give it slack. Now with a conventional reel, you can thumb the spool, and when you thumb the spool lightly, what happens is the jig actually goes vertical and drops down. You can't do that with a spinning reel. So when you're fishing in deep water, it's very difficult to control the jig's drop because it needs that, okay? Some people actually hold the line, but you can't be as consistent as either thumbing the spool like that lightly or putting your index finger front like this. It's just easier with conventional gear. Now you'll also notice that on my big one right here, I'm not using an Oshia Jigger 2000. This is an Oshia Jigger 2000, and this is a Trinidad 16. The reason being is that on a narrow reel, when you're dropping down, the stack of line, or what's called an arbor, is actually smaller than on a wider spool reel. Now, the reason why you want a lot more line and why you want a wider spool reel is because of that slack I was telling you about earlier. So, the more line you have, the more you actually get back on. You'll notice this on a full spool. When you reel, it's actually what's indicated on the box. So like on a full spool, if it says that it reels in 40 inches, or let's say in centimeters, it could be, let's say some reels actually go up to 53. And when you reel, one revolution will give you 53 centimeters. But on a half spool, if you measure it, it's not going to give you 53 centimeters. It's less, probably 30. On an Ocean Jigger 2000, which has a narrow spool, at half, it's going to reel in way less line than a Trinidad would. Of course, it doesn't have the automatic engage, but it is stronger. Okay, and the gear ratio is about the same. But what it does give me is that it gives me the power to actually get all that slack off and then really move my jig. Now, a lot of people don't realize that when you're dropping, that 2% stretch, or let's say 3 or 4%, equates to a lot. So if you're dropping down to 100 meters, 4% is already 4 meters. So imagine for you to move your jig, for you to move 30 centimeters, okay? You have to reel in all that slack with your reel together with your rod to be able to move the jig. You have to reel in 4 meters. That's at just 100 meters. So imagine if you're fishing deeper, that number goes up. So you're gonna have to reel in as much slack and stretch on the line before you actually get to move.
Instead of actually going through the technicals and then, telling you guys exactly what is and what's not, let's incorporate all of that into a story. So I'm going to tell you guys basically my journey, because my journey had a lot to do with the reels. Okay. Now, just for your information, let's what do you call this? Let's condense everything. But this is kind of like a journey that I've started like a long time ago. But what we'll do is we will just count the time that I've been here in the UAE. And I arrived here 2005. So from 2005 all the way to 2025, I've been doing this thing. Okay? So when I first arrived here, no one knew what braid was. No one knew how to use jigs properly. So that was a ball because jigs were cheap. Like, original usuries for $3. Man, it was nuts. It was great because no one else bought them. Braid I bought at like what, 12 dirhams. So that's $4. Because again, these were samples that were sent by the companies to the tackle shops here. They didn't have an idea. So I had a ball. I'd have like $30 with me, or 60. Go to the place and just really buy stuff. It was funny because they didn't have an idea, and they would ask me, "What do you use this for?" I was like, "I'm buying this for the Philippines, And so when I go home, I'm gonna use them to tie nets with." So, that was that, and it lasted for quite a while because the people here were so used to using mono. And the first ever person to cast a jig from shore here was, I think, me in Jumeirah Beach back in 2005. So I was casting. I was using braid. I had a that at that time, a really like a heavier than needed rod and reel, and I was catching, and people could not figure out what I was doing until after a couple of sessions there. I saw people casting 200-gram jigs on like really long telescopic rods and 50-pound test mono. So that was that. Okay, so a little bit of history. I'm just I'm sharing this whole journey because it's really important, because there's a really big lesson to learn, and I'll show you along the way how much money I could have saved. Here's the thing. Um, in the first video, I actually mentioned the pitfalls, or the pitfall, the biggest pitfall that the angler can make when choosing gear. And this video is specifically a 101, and it is for the guys that are starting out. Now, for you guys that have experience, you watch this for entertainment, that's great. Maybe you could pick up a lesson and, or at least hang out for a story that, I messed up in, because I certainly did a lot of mistakes. But, um, what I'm trying to do here is show you my mistakes and what I was doing then and what I'm doing now, so that you can see the big difference. And trust me, the difference is really big. Okay? And we're talking of the same boat. Probably the fishing is a bit more difficult, but imagine if I was actually doing the right things then, I would have enjoyed. And if that was my starting point, what the heck would I be doing now? So that's just how things go. Now remember, this is a time when the information you get are largely from DVDs, because a lot of people are gatekeeping things, and there's very little information on the internet. If you find information in the internet, they would be in Japanese. And this was in like the early 2000s. And then the Chinese, Taiwanese popped up. They basically kind of became popular. So the guys over at AG, Pony, okay. So instead of Chinese, then we had like Chinese content, right? So we see some stuff in this, and then a few years later, Jose Wehebe came out, and then he brought the butterfly jigs from Japan to the States, and then finally we had some English content, sorta, because when you're selling, you really don't. I mean, also understand that these guys, they didn't really dive down to the culture, to like the whole nitty gritty and stuff. So they just showed stuff, but didn't really explain anything. And I'd be surprised if they actually also understood everything. So that was that. That was like whatever information we found, and we just watched. Okay, and there's something common with all of this. They were all targeting big fish. They were all showing big fish, and they were like literally using bigger equipment. And they were fishing in places like Australia, New Zealand, and then Florida and all this, and they were all catching big fish. So we were like, holy crap, man, this looks effective, right? So the information that we received, or we're being fed, is actually what we're trying to emulate. That's one, because it's all the information we can get. The gear that was also made available is obviously bigger than needed. Okay, so they were all like, so when you're talking jigging, it's always like big stuff, thick line and all this, because in the videos or in the magazines, you see that they're all pulling and all this. So it goes back to what I was saying in the first video, that most of the gear is actually quite big. Now remember that we're fishing here, we're actually fishing in the Gulf. before. Okay, we didn't go to the East Coast. So here, because it was cheaper, okay, and going to the East Coast, it was kind of like an ordeal back then. So, and I did have a car. So, fishing here with my cousin, in the harbor, and just going out to the place where eventually it would become like the world. You could go to Google Maps and then you could type Dubai the world, and you'll see that area. So that area, we used to fish around there from Beira. So we'd ride a boat, go around and fish that area. Maximum 30 meters. Okay. Now, when I tell you that everything is oversized, imagine this was actually my first reel. Okay. Not with this handle, obviously. It had a rubber handle. And yes, Kelvin, older than my daughter. So imagine using this 50-pound test and fishing for 100-gram jigs, 150 in 30 meters max. And normally we were fishing 15 to 20, 25 at the very most. Normally we were catching, fish that big. That's it, no more than 4 kilos. And I was using equipment like this, and you know what? It was perfectly okay. It was perfectly normal because guess what? No one knew. So at that point, an 8,000 was actually kind of like a small reel, or it was not small. It was normal, So it's very easy to get into it because even if I already had quite a bit of fishing experience then, if I was to decide on something, I would actually decide on something big with a lot of capacity, with a lot of power, so that I don't have to buy other gear. And when I fish somewhere, I could use it. Okay. One thing I got right though is that I was thinking, hey, I am going to be fishing in shallow water. So if I had a fast reel, I'd wind twice and then it goes like to the surface already. So figuratively, it's not like that. Probably 4 winds. But after that, that's when I said like, okay, I need a slower reel. So I bought a PG, not knowing that for fast jigging, this is what you need. Now, again, this is a 101 video, so it's for guys that are starting out. What you need is a power gear, a PW for some manufacturers, or a low speed reel. Basically, what it is that each crank you have, there's a revolution on the on here. Okay, so it's slower than a fast retrieve reel, and what is this? No, it's the same for these conventionals or overheads. So one crank, it spins this slower. For spinning reels, one crank will spin this slower. So it retrieves line at a slower rate. If you're going with a fast retrieve reel, what happens is that when you crank, it goes quite fast. And here we go. So this is an HG. Okay, so notice how fast it spins and how slow I'm retrieving. Okay, and that's a small reel. So this is see, it's slower. And I'm actually turning this slower. Now, when you're fast jigging, what you want is constant movement of the jig. There are jigs that you can pause for like making them work optimally, but the hallmark of fast jigging is that you're always constantly moving your rod and reel. Okay, so could be there's a pause and then bang, pause, you know, or it could be bang, bang, just like that. It depends on the jig that you're using. But see, here's the thing. If you're fishing in, say, 100 meters of water, just to make it easy. Supposing this is your boat, and then you're dropping. Okay, so this is the red one, the red line. So you're dropping down. Okay, now on a low speed reel, what happens is that, let's do this in blue. On a low speed reel, when you retrieve your lure or your jig, it will zigzag. Okay, it will zigzag and it will be like that. Okay, let's say you're fishing shallow and you're reeling all the way to the boat, so it's zigzagging, and you can see that you're zigzagging and it takes a while, and bang, it's there. So what happens on a fast retrieve reel? Okay, so what happens is that this, okay, this is green, it will be like this. And guess what? It will be up on the boat really fast. Okay, so not only will your jig's action be kind of different, it won't be as like zigzaggy. Okay, what it is that the jig is being pulled out of the strike zone, and when it comes to the strike zone, okay, there's like fish have habits, right? So what happens is that the fish will not, this is theoretical, but the fish will actually not chase after your lure up to a certain point. So let's say if you're fishing at 100 meters, okay, so this is 100 meters. Okay, the fish will not go out of the structure, okay, at, let's say, more than 20 meters. It varies. It depends on the fish. But like, take for example, fish like grouper and all that, they won't chase. But fish like amberjack, they will probably chase it up to about 20 meters. But then that's it. And for targeting amberjacks, what we found over the years was that you crank 30 times. You know, you drop it down. The very first drop you do, you drop it down, close the reel, back. You know, just reel in as fast as you can, because they get triggered like that. So the first drop you'll do, the first 5 drops actually, because when you're drifting, right? So the first 5 drops, what we do is really drop the jig down and jig it up as fast as possible, and only up to 30 winds. After 30, we drop it down again, and then do the same thing. Now, that will trigger any of these fast moving predators like amberjack to hit the jig. Now, if you're using an HG or an XG, there are 2 things, okay? It's like riding a bike uphill on fast gears. So it's going to be difficult, okay? On a low speed reel, it's going to be easier for you to turn it, because it's low speed and it has a lot of torque. Whereas where, you know, you have a fast retrieve reel, and it's kind of difficult. Again, like a bike going uphill. If it's a car, think of it this way: you're going uphill on 5th gear, you know, where you should be on 1st or 2nd, depending on slope, right? And then um, the main thing is for power gears is that it actually stays within the strike zone, and that's very important because guess what? Over that strike zone, there's no other fish, and most of the time you're fishing the bottom. Remember, this was at a time when um, you know we haven't quite figured out a lot of things yet. Okay, so uh, it was still all exploratory. So fishing and I believe the Japs or the Japanese and the Taiwanese guys have already caught some tuna, but you know people were like going, it's okay, this is for bottom fish. So we didn't know yet that we could target pelagics with fast jigging. We didn't know yet. And aside from that, what the hard part was of obviously we can't buy stuff locally. So as much as we wanted to, even if you had the money to buy, you actually had to buy elsewhere. Because guess what? All people were selling here were cheap stuff. You could not buy a Stella, you could not buy a Twin Power back in the day. You could buy pens, and you could buy a lot of trolling stuff, rods, reels, monoline, all this, but you can't find specific stuff like these twin powers. In fact, a lot of people didn't even know what a twin power was back in the day. Now it's common. Stellas are common. So that's that. Okay. So now here's the thing. From this in the Gulf, what we're using now are these sizes. Not this particular reel. This is an HG, but there's a PG. I have a PG somewhere, and I actually made a video of that. But reels this size. So imagine the difference. Okay, this is a size 2500, so about a 3000. Okay, so 3000 versus an 8000. This I used in Fujairah before. Now we've found, like, several years ago, that this is more than enough for majority of the fishing there. So it's 2 sizes down. So as you can see, this whole thing is actually something that's all very progressive. Now, if I knew then that this would probably, do a lot of good for me, it would have been fantastic, because guess what? This is cheaper than that. The line is cheaper than the line there. And you catch a hell of a lot more fish. Now, as far as overheads are concerned, this is the size that I'm currently using for this side here. 200 size. Okay, lighter, easier to manage. Okay, and then in Fujairah, I've been using this for a really long time, and it served me well. So kind of the equivalent of the 8000. And then I've upgraded it to this one right here, but that's another story. But so this, okay, but discontinued, and you had to modify it. Okay, so I added a handle to make it longer, give it me more control, changed the foot of the reel, and internally I also changed a few things. So I'm not gonna tell you to do that. For deeper water jigging, and if you want something for let's say as a standard, okay, OSHA Jigger 2000. That's it. Now, here's the thing. If you are looking for like one system that you could just do, and you want to have a system that you don't outgrow, buy an overhead. Buy an overhead. But if you just want to keep things simple, for fast jigging, spinning. Okay. If you split it down, there's actually a purpose for both. But just for the ease of things, if you want something, a system that you don't outgrow, overheads. And overheads, as far as, jigging is concerned, there are two brands that you should look at as standards, okay? This is a Shimano Osha jigger. The other one is a Daiwa. I don't have an example, okay? But a Daiwa Saltiga. And you look for the PG right there. Okay, this is kind of this size. It's big. Okay, so if you're fishing deep water, this is a standard. Holds decent amount of line, very strong, and this is a Japanese domestic model, JDM. And that is not a clicker. That is a spool lock. So just in case you snag, reel in tight, pop it. Now, if you're fishing in shallow water for smaller fish, okay, a reel like this will suit you well. And this is a 200 sized Osha Calcutta. Yeah, Osha Calcutta, because an Osha Conquest is actually gold. Okay, and this is, man, this serves me really well for fishing here in shallower water up to like up to 30 meters. Possibly I could push it up to 50. Okay, and I do really well with this. I use this for slow jigging, fast jigging, tie rubber. So it's not something that you just okay, even bottom fishing, But see, here's the thing. Now I use thinner lines, smaller jigs, smaller rods. Of course, it's more efficient. It's really more effective than the bigger stuff. What about if you hook onto something big? Hooking onto something big is actually very rare. Okay, so what I have learned is always prepare for what's there every day instead of what's there maybe, because it makes much more sense to actually spend your money in that instead of actually spending on something that may or may not happen. Okay, so like take for example, buying gas in a gas station every day is probably more practical than buying a huge tanker and parking it at your house. It's the same thought. It's literally the same thought. So that is a very practical and very straightforward advice. Now, two things that you look for here: narrow. Okay, that's why I always say that the 2000 sized Osha jigger is actually more of a fast jigging reel than slow jigging reel, especially if you look at the capacities. So these two reels, narrow, because it is easier for you to actually jig it without leveling the line. Okay, so take note of that. So when you're fast jigging, you don't level the line. So a wide spooled reel is very difficult to manage. Now, different story with slow jigging, okay? But with fast jigging, it's very easy for you to actually jig with narrow spool reels. Now, the line is not going to be even after everything. So what you do is just drop it down to the bottom after your fishing session, boom, okay? And then level it. It's as easy as that, okay? So that's a trick for you guys. Now, on smaller reels, they have level winds. So, lighter line and all this. But as soon as you get to heavier lines, don't buy reels with level winds. That is experience talking, because guess what? Those things explode. And you don't want to be caught when that level line fails. So if you're thinking that, hey, you don't know, especially the new guys, because they go like, hey, it levels the line, it's easier. It doesn't help you. Okay. Eventually you'll hook a fish that's strong enough to actually break that, and that's a disadvantage. It's a huge liability. Okay. Now, what about spinning reels? What do you look for? Again, Spinning reels, you look for low gear. That's one. Two, don't ever buy reels or don't ever use reels. Actually, you know what? Let me change that. Don't let me go back to the original one. Don't ever buy reels with composite bodies. What happens is that when they're subjected to greater force, it flexes. And when it flexes, the gears inside don't align. And then, okay, also this and this actually kind of bend, like that. And you won't be able to retrieve the line efficiently. So that's why I always say, for, I don't know the Daiwa equivalent, and maybe someone that uses Daiwa would be able to fill things in. But buy at least a Stradic, which is like the I think the first reel in the Shimano line, which is cheap and has a steel body. Okay, might be heavier, but you need that. Now, as you go up the scale, you'll have reels with magnesium bodies, you'll have reels with aluminum bodies, SW models, and all this. And that's already a matter of personal preference when it comes to budgeting. But for fast jigging, like heavier stuff, I always say start with at least a Stradic. Even with the lighter stuff, start with at least a Stradic. So something like this size, okay, for fishing in probably 30 meters or less. There's a 4,000 model that's a bit bigger, and that's good for up to about 100 meters, um, and it would most likely catch uh, quite a lot, or 90% of the fish that you will encounter, and that's what you want.
Spinning reels are nice, they're easy to use and everything, but it's kind of like a one trick pony. So your use for spinning reels is good with long jigs, but for overheads you can pretty much use any sort of jig, long, short, semi-long, hybrids. Okay, so that you could use with overheads, and it gives you the flexibility, although they're a bit harder to use. So that's kind of like the trade-off there. And obviously that's for fast jigging, because for slow jigging you could only use overheads. There's no such thing as a spinning reel for slow jigging. So um, by covering only overheads for both, we're comparing apples to apples. And that's it. Just a heads up. All right. Something you need to realize with jigging in general is that the rod, reel, and jig work as one system. You have your leader, you have your assist hooks, and you have your line. But you can have thick line, you can have thick leaders, you can have weird ass assist hooks. The truth remains that the rod, reel, and jig will move because of what you do with the rod and reel. Then the jig reacts. Whatever line you put in, whatever leader you put in, whatever assist hook you put in, that is one truth. The rod, reel, and jig work as one system. Okay, fast and slow jigging are not just about the jig. That's something that you remember, because a lot of people, something that you need to remember, because a lot of people focus so much on the jigs. They go like, oh, for fast jigging, these are the jigs, for slow. No, rod, reel, and jig work together. So it's you can't just put a fast jig on a slow jigging rod and reel and then expect that it would work. So rod, reel, and jig work as one system. Okay, the rod creates the movement, the reel controls the speed and tension, and the jig reacts to both. If one part doesn't match, the jig won't move correctly, the fish won't recognize it as prey, and their entire setup determines whether the jig looks natural or not. If the fish don't recognize your jig as something like a prey item, they're not going to strike it. Okay. In fact, there's a potential for them to actually get scared and then just leave the area altogether. So again, that's a truth. Okay. Rod, reel, and jig work as one system. Okay. Another key concept that you need to realize is that the fish bite when the jig is horizontal. Most of, I would say 99% of the time. Okay. This is something that's very difficult for people to actually imagine, but we'll fix that. Okay. Fish usually strike when the jig is flat or horizontal. Okay. That's in this position, because in this position, guess what? That's when it flutters, it slides, or does one of those two things. Okay. So it either slides or wobbles. In this case, because it's narrow, it's gonna roll. Okay. But that only happens when the jig is horizontal. They rarely strike when the fish is straight up and down, vertical like this. And you know, I'll show you why right now if you haven't realized that yet. Okay, so if this is the jig position and this is the mouth of the fish, okay, when the fish strikes the jig, their mouth is open, right? It doesn't fit. As soon as it's horizontal, you can see that. And that's a key concept, okay? That's biomechanics at work, okay? Like that, okay? So, was there or are there ever times when the fish will hit or get hooked when the jig is vertical? Well, yes, thank you for asking. Here's an example right there, okay? See? If it fits the mouth, well, sure, but it's still going to be easier when it is in the horizontal position. Okay. When the jig is in that position, remember it has action. Okay, so it will look like a weak or injured fish, and it's easy to catch, as you can see there. Okay, now a vertical jig, it travels fast, right? Because this is the part where you pull and it will go up. When the rod relaxes, that's when the jig is on the horizontal position. But when the rod is bent, most of the time what happens is that affects the load right there. See? So as soon as the tip pops, it goes like this. So yeah, and although there are several fish that are in that kind of position, like cutlass, in their natural, what do you call this? Just because the fish won't be able to grab it, that's it. All right. So, the truth of this whole thing, that's why it's a key concept, is because the reel plays a really big part. Okay, the rod plays a really big part for the jig to go in that position, whether it be fast or slow jigging. The rod and the reel working together is for just that. Okay, for this jig to stay in the horizontal position as much as possible, because it's the only position where you will get that. So remember that. I've said this in a video, and I'm pretty sure that there's quite a few watching that would say, like, yeah, I often hear this. All right, so fast jigging and slow jigging, part of the same system. Jigging, okay? They're part of the same system. The thing is, though, fast jigging and slow jigging work in opposite directions. The key difference is where the action happens. And the action is that, okay? When the jig goes in the horizontal plane. For fast jigging, the action happens when the jig is moving up. The retrieve creates that movement, okay? So when you are reeling and pumping, that is when the jig, as I have illustrated earlier, okay? So your rod tip goes like that. You have your recoil. Once it goes up, boom, the jig will jump and dart in the horizontal position. On fast jigging, it happens with the retrieve. As soon as you turn and pump, okay? slow jigging, the action happens when the jig is moving down. So when you pull up, it loads, boom, gets the reel up, and then with the controlled slack, it goes down. Okay? So for slow jigging, the action happens when the jig is moving down. That is by design. The jig will flutter down. Gravity creates the movement. Okay? So this single difference between the jig moving up and the jig moving down, and the action they give to the jig, is the single difference, and it changes everything about gear choice. That single motion dictates the rod and the reel. Okay, so remember that. Now, fast jigging uses a slow reel. A lot of people, including myself back then, thought it was kind of backwards. But what happens is, if a reel is too fast, is that the jig will move too quickly. It leaves the strike zone too fast, and the fish will have less time to react. Okay, it's not that the fish won't react; the fish will have less time to react, and I'll tell you why it matters in a bit. Okay, with a slower reel, the jig stays longer in the strike zone. And I've discussed this with illustrations before. Okay, so it gives more chance for the fish to bite. And I think in the previous video that I've also I've shown how fast jigging is with the Japanese. They're actually moving slow. Okay, so slowing down the retrieve increases the effectiveness because you're relying on the action of the jig. Okay, instead of just a zigzagging motion, which you could get even with a sinker. So you're maximizing the effectiveness and the action of the jig, which you paid for, and some of them are like cost a lot of money for a reason. You're making the jig move the way it's supposed to move. Okay, so fast jigging, slow reel, it gives the jig the motion that it needs. Now for slow jigging, you use a fast reel. Okay, because this is the opposite situation. You're dealing with an opposite situation here. Again, like I said, fast jigging is the kind of like the same thing, but they're going the opposite direction. So for gear, it's also the opposite, right? In slow jigging, the jig is constantly falling and fluttering. Okay, that's what you want, right? And this creates slack on the line. Now, if the reel is too slow, the slack builds up and you lose contact with the jig. And that's very important when it comes to flow jigging. It is the contact with the jig. You always have to have contact with the jig. Okay? If you lose contact, guess what? You don't feel the bites. Okay? With a fast reel, the slack is completely removed quickly. Okay? And you stay connected. And the reel's job here is not the speed. For a lot of people that actually think that it's important, it's not. The job of the reel is control. That is it. Now, if you are in contact the whole time, it gives you full control. Now, you might notice that we have mentioned rod, we have mentioned reel, and we've mentioned jig, but we didn't mention line. That's one key factor. Of course it is, but it's part of a problem, really. All right, so one key thing that you need to remember is that line stretch becomes a big problem in deeper water, and the deeper the water, the bigger the issue. Braid stretches at a rate of 2 to 4% depending on the technology that they apply to the braid. It could be the coating, but more than that, it's actually how it's braided, because as I've mentioned in a video about fishing lines, there's space between the braid, right? And like, take for example, 8 braid actually has like 8 times more the the voids in between. When it comes to deeper water, you'll find a lot of Japanese anglers actually use 4X because the strands are bigger and the voids between those braidings are actually less as well. So you get a rate of stretch of about 2 to 4%, depending on brand, depending on technology. Okay, so what that gives you is up to 4 meters of stretch at 100 meters of water. Okay, now this is just the line going down. Remember, there's still current affecting, so there's a bit of slack there, not just stretch. But that's a fact that we have to live with. So at 200 meters, imagine that it could have like up to 8 meters of stretch. Why this is important? Well, think about this. That slack and stretch, if it's there, okay, the jig's not going to move. So the reel's function is to actually wind all that, so that when you move the rod, the jig moves. It's as simple as that, which gives us the next point. Reel speed is really just managing slack. Okay? So a key question becomes, is the technique creating slack or tension? Right? So for fast jigging, you're mostly dealing with a tight line and you have less slack. And that is key. Okay? Now the reason being is you're constantly reeling, right? Now in slow jigging, there's a constant slack because that's when the jig is actually moving. That's why for fast jigging, you need a slower reel because you're constantly reeling all that slack and all that stretch. Okay, so you don't need a fast reel. It's doing its job. You're moving the rod, taking up the slack and the stretch, reeling all that in. Okay, for slow jigging, you need a faster reel because you're managing that slack. Always aim for the tightest line possible, okay, so that you have direct connection with the jig, and that gives you control. Okay, now conventional reels give better control for slow jigging, as I've mentioned earlier. This comes down to controlling the drop. With conventional reels, the spool can be controlled with the thumb. When it's dropping, that's it, like that. Okay, drop speed can be adjusted as well for reels such as the Studio Ocean Mark. Okay, you have this example right here, which is the what do you call this? The S2T, and before the minimum, you can actually manage the tension. Right, this is only unique to the S2Ts. In Shimano's version, there's the fall lever. Okay, for any other reel, you have your index finger and your thumb to control the descent. Okay, now it's the same for fast jigging reels. All you need is your thumb, and then you literally just let it drop down. This allows a more vertical drops, better control of jig behavior. Okay, with spinning reels, you have less control over descent, and it's very difficult to manage the slack consistently, but it does give you the perfect drop back. But that's a different application. So your jig, if it's a rear weighted jig, then you could drop it down really fast. You could just drop, but then again, you lose the strikes that happen on the way down, and you kind of get a lot of jigs lost that way. Okay, but the point being is that for better control, overheads are it. Wider spools. Not all reels will retrieve the same amount of line. That's another concept that you need to think about. So full spool, okay, retrieves more line per turn. Half spool retrieves less. Smaller circle, bigger circle. So when the reel is kind of full, you will have your fastest retrieves. Okay, but when you drop down at, let's say, 100 meters, that reel is slower, and as you wind the line, the jig progressively moves faster. Okay, narrow spooled reels, it loses a lot of efficiency faster. Okay, wider spools maintain better line pickup, and this matters especially in deeper water where more slack needs to be recovered. But that is truer to um, slow jigging than it is for fast jigging. Now, a narrow spooled reel gives you the ability to jig without leveling the line. And that's very important for fast jigging. Whereas for slow jigging, okay, a wider spool means that you're able to have a consistently faster rate of retrieve. But not only that, also your drag. You know, your drag is closer to its original setting more than it is when it is when it has less line. Okay, so as your line decreases, your drag increases. So if you set it at say 7 kilos, at half, it would be closer to 14 kilos than it is 7. Okay, but on a wider spooled reel, okay, the increase of drag is actually lower. So always keep that in mind. So for fast jigging reels, it's more convenient to have narrow spooled reels. For slow jigging, you want wider spools. Okay. Long handles improve power and control. A lot of people think this is BS. Let me show you guys this. Okay. Now, originally, this is the first time I'm showing this that I've changed the handle. All right. Now, originally, what happens here, or originally, the handle was shorter by about a few centimeters, a couple of centimeters, or probably 1.5. Okay. Why this matters? You know, when it's shorter, right? Let's see the stock here. Here, this one, because it's the same size. Okay, with this is shorter a bit by 1 centimeter. What happens is that when you're going around, it's actually a smaller circle. With a longer handle, it's a bigger circle. And guess what? That gives me a lot more leverage. Okay, easier to turn under load, and it gives me better control. A shorter handle gives you one advantage: faster rotation, because like I mentioned, it's going on a smaller circle. Now, this is a slow jigging reel, and it has already kind of a longer handle for the Studio Ocean Mark. And what this gives me is enough, okay, enough leverage, and also it's a good balance of speed. So for slow jigging, you know, a little bit shorter handle will give you faster rate of retrieve, okay, and or faster rotation of the handle, which gives you a faster rate of retrieve, and it gives you really good leverage. So a handle that's 1 centimeter or a centimeter and a half shorter than what I would use for my fast jigging reels. And guess what? It makes a difference. You could really feel it. Okay. So this becomes important. A longer handle becomes important in deeper water. Okay. And when you're handling bigger fish, it's easier. It gives you a lot more leverage. Okay. So it gives you better feel at managing resistance. For less effort, you get more control. And that's the thing with longer handles. The main differences between a fast and a slower reel is the time in the strike zone. So for fast jigging, you need the time in the strike zone. For slow jigging, your time in the strike zone is dictated by gravity, not your retrieve. So all you have to do is just drop back down and you're there. So you're able to linger longer in the strike zone because gravity is what makes your jig move. Whereas for fast jigging, you can't do the same because the retrieve is what gives the jig action. So your time in the strike zone is determined by how fast your reel is. Okay. For slow jigging, the idea with the faster reel is contact with your jig, because that's literally how you move your jig and how you detect strikes. So, you know, two very different things. Okay. So for fast jigging, you control how long the jig stays effective while moving up by using a slow reel. For slow jigging, controlling the slack so that the jig works properly while it's falling is its key to success. Okay, so a lot of people might think that faster reel gives you better performance, but in reality, the wrong reel speed will give you just a bad jig action, uh, and the worse the action is of the jig, the fewer bites you get, and it's as simple as that. It's either you do a fast retrieve reel on a jig that's supposed to be moving a certain way, and you're killing it. Okay, in essence, the reel controls how much time the jig spends on that horizontal position, because a faster jig will cut that, cut that motion. So instead of it going like this, on a fast retrieve, it cuts it, and guess what? It just does that. And a long jigs effectivity is its slide. That's why you're buying long jigs in the first place. So yeah, just the jig. Okay, the jig's hang time, or the jig's position in the horizontal orientation, is dictated. How long it stays there is dictated by the reel. And for fast jigging, that's dictated by your rate of retrieve. For slow jigging, it's dictated by gravity, right? And how much slack you're controlling, or how much slack you're giving it. Okay, so fast jigging creates this movement when you're lifting. For slow jigging, it creates that movement while it's falling. Remember that. Okay, so for fast jigging, best tip that I could give you is to slow things down, as what the Japanese have shown us. Okay, for slow jigging, speeding up line recovery, it gives you more control, right? And that is what do you call this? That's what gives you success. Max drag power. I dare say that it is one of the biggest metrics that people use in their real buying decision making. A lot of people say like, oh, I like this reel better because it's stronger. So when they say stronger, it means the drag pressure, okay, or the drag output. And that's something quite important, because it kind of gives us a rough idea of exactly what the reel can do. Okay, now here's the thing. A lot of manufacturers will put the max drag power on, and what happens is that when you buy the reel, they don't really reach that. For some, it reaches. Okay, it reaches that level. Let's say, take for example, one reel would say that it is max 50 pounds, 25 kg, somewhere there. Put it together, bang, yes, 25 on the dot. Yet there are some that don't. You'll find that it doesn't really reach that. Now, some manufacturers would say that there's a break-in period, that as the drag washers wear down as you use them, it will hit that number. Be that as it may, it is a metric that the reel may or may not reach. Just take note. Okay. Now, if you want to really make sure that your reel reaches that, the only way is really to test it out. Okay. But all I'm saying is that sometimes, for some brands, you won't be able to hit the max immediately. It could be that, the carbon needs to wear down a little bit so that you can tighten it a bit more. Okay? So just take note. Sometimes it doesn't reach at all. Okay? So, it's just and that's a problem with the design. All right? And we have nothing to do with that. Now, the max drag of a reel
is basically the amount of pressure that it can generate by friction. So in these reels, okay, when you move these, like these are lever drag reels. So if you move this, there's going to be kind of like a drawbar that tightens. Okay, so there's a part here that's called a cam. It's kind of like a ramp. It's a round thing that's ramped. Okay, so it goes sideways like that. So as you push this, it goes from the thin side towards the thick side. So imagine that it's a circle, and then you put it that way, it forms a ramp like that. Okay, twisting around. And what happens is it pulls a bar inside here, or the shaft, and it pushes this side plate here inside the spool. Okay, it pushes, and when it pushes like that against a what's this, the inside surface, there's a housing for this particular reel. At least there's a housing on this side that gets pressured into pushing onto what's called a drag plate, and the drag plate presses on the drag material, which is in this instance carbon. Some reels will have cork, so kind of depends, but the most widely used 3 types of drags that are used is felt for the cheaper reels, or for the ones that require very little drag pressure, like light tackle reels. They use felt, cork, and carbon. Okay, so those are the 3 most common types of drag washer material. So once the pressure is on, that's it. Now for star drag reels, basically you tighten it here, and you loosen it up by doing that. For lever drags, push forward and back. Main difference with lever drags is that you have repeatability in each fishing trip. Before you go and after, it is recommended that you loosen the after the trip, you loosen the star drag. Okay, for obviously when you go out, you have to set your drags, so you tighten up the drags. This is done so that it doesn't compress and break your washers. For this, for lever drags, all you have to do is preset using a knob here, okay, and then set it while you're fishing, and then you can just back it off into free spool and you're good to go. Okay, now something that you have to really understand when it comes to drag is that when you're setting your drag, you're setting it on a full spool. Okay, while you're fishing, you have to drop down. So in the instance of, say, casting, you've already set your drag. So the distance between your reel and the fish, when the fish bites, changes the drag pressure. So the fish feel a different pull of the different force of drag, even if you have set it, let's say you've set the drag and you use poundage for it, because you're dealing with force. Okay, so you set a constant force on this by moving the lever forward, putting it on strike, or in the instance of star drags, you're tightening the star drag, and that creates the friction that creates the force. Okay, so that is set. So you set it at a fraction of the max drag power, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's a poundage or rated in kg. So take, for example, you're using 20,
let's say 20 kg line. Okay, and you choose a fraction of that. A standard would be either 1/3 or 1/4 of that. Let's say for the sake of easier math, it's 1/4. So your drag force set when you're putting it on strike at full spool would be 5 kilos, because 20 divided by 4, 1/4 is 5. So you set it at 5 kilos. Okay, let's say that the maximum drag that your reel is able to produce is about 30. Okay, so your line is 20 kg, 20 kg line, and the maximum that your reel would be able to, the output, maximum output, let's say, is 30 kg. Okay, just for, you know, reference sake. Now, that's a lot. 30 kg is a lot, and I can tell you that. Okay, so 30 kg is about 66 pounds. That's substantial, considering that when a fish hits and then you put it up on max, you're trying to stop a constant 66 pounds. In most cases, you know, if you're on a very strong fish and you're putting it on max drag, that's gonna rip the rod and reel off your hands. So yeah, that's sketchy. So let's say you put it at 5, okay, because that's basically what we discussed earlier. 20 kg line, you put it at 5 kg. Okay, now here's how physics works. Okay, and this is something that you really should understand. As the spool diameter decreases, the drag force should increase, because the torque exerted by the drag system remains constant. It's a constant force, remember, 5 kg, it doesn't change, okay? And the force is inversely proportional to the radius. Now, to put it simply, okay, just so it's easier to understand, there's two things that happen. The stack of line that you have diminishes, and when it diminishes, the force that it generates increases. Okay, so the more the stack of line decreases, the more it will become stronger, which means at 5 kilos on strike, when it's full, it will progressively become stronger. That's 1. 2, it will progressively become slower, because the amount of line that make up the stack when you're turning it, okay, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, so if we have this and we put line on that, let's say like that, you pull it out, it's long. Okay, now you measure from a smaller circle like that, and then you'll see that the length is actually shorter. So as your line decreases, your reel becomes stronger and it becomes slower. Now, here's what a lot of people don't realize. When you're reeling in and when you're gaining line, it flips, okay? Your reel will slowly get weaker, and it will work itself towards the 5 kg that you initially set. And it will also get faster because the stack gets bigger. There's another thing that's very simplistic on its own, but there's another thing that actually happens. You see, this is a narrow reel. This is a wider reel. So you can see there, they have the same diameter, but one is narrow, one is wide. Now, with the wider reel, what do you think happens? This increase of drag happens gradually. because not only does the line go up and down for this, it has a lot of sideways movement. So your drag spike, and that's what it's called, your drag spike is slower on wider reels. Okay, so that's something that you should actually keep in mind. Now, if you go to, let's say, this reel, okay, let's say this is our reel, and you set it at 5 kg, okay, there is a point in time where the breaking strain of the line would be equal to the force that's generated by the reel. All because as the line diminishes, the force increases, okay? It's just, a smaller spool radius. Remember this, the smaller spool radius means the same torque results in higher force. Okay? So again, as mentioned, the smaller the diameter of your line stack, the more force it will generate. The force that you initially put on, it's constant. It's constant. Again, like same torque. It will generate higher force. What do you think will happen? If you have 20, okay, if you have 20 kg, let's say 20 kg line, let's say at half, the spike is a kind of a huge percentage. So from 5 kg, it would probably be around 10, let's say, at more than half, 10 or more, probably. There's actually an equation that you could use. You plug in the new diameter, the force, and then you multiply it with I know that because I wrote an article about it a long time ago, but without going into that, you basically take the old diameter, new diameter, and then you can compute. And remember, you have a constant force there, which is like in our computation, that's like 5. So you apply the force on a newer, smaller diameter, and you'll see that it's a huge increase. So even now, if we take the new diameter, let's say we strip off the line and then we took a scale, and you'll see that it's actually quite accurate. So at 5 kg, let's say it doubles near the the halfway mark before you hit the arbor, okay, or the bare arbor where the line is tied. Before you even hit that, the force is more than 20 kg, and your line will break. That's the reality of it. So before you even get spooled, your line will already break. At this point in time, okay, if you're using a thin leader, that would have popped a long time ago. Or if your hook isn't strong enough, it will probably bend. Now remember, we are only measuring the forces that we can measure. Okay? We cannot measure how much pressure is exerted by the fish and the line going through the water. We can't measure that, but that's higher, which means that, you can see this in videos on YouTube. You can actually watch it. You'll see that even if they still have a lot of line on their reels, it pops, especially if they tighten it. And a lot of people kind of tighten the drag as the fish runs. And what happens is that they're increasing the pressure even more, and the line will pop. So we go back to the question then. Should it be
a metric that you look at when you're buying reels? And then should it be that take for example, you're looking at bait casting reels, and then you see an a Calcutta Conquest 200, and then it has a 7 kg of drag, and then you think it's weak. That's fine. At the end of the day, what happens is that manufacturers will always put sort of a safety, and I think in the case of Shimano, they know this very well. 7 kg when you start is very, very much normal, because guess what? The line that you put on, let's say, a Calcutta Conquest is actually kind of thin. When it comes to jigging reels, it's the same thing. Okay, so like take for example, for this particular reel, this is an L80 by Studio Ocean Mark, and it has a max drag power of 14 kg. The line that you can put on here, the recommended is maximum of PE8 on the 100. Okay, that's about 100-pound line. And then for this one, you could put PE5, and it holds 550 meters. So if you think about it, 14 kg max is plenty, considering that if you max it out at full spool, it progressively becomes stronger as the line goes out. For me, max drag isn't as important. For me, I look at how the reel is engineered and how ergonomic it is to use, and other features. Yeah, you consider the max drag power because at the end of the day, you don't want a weak reel. But there's ways around that. If you understand how things work, you would be able to look at aftermarket parts that perhaps increase the surface area of the drag surface. It could be a change on the drag plate. It could be the material itself. Like take for example, putting a carbon fiber disc that instead of a strip, you can put like a solid one. So in the case of Shimano, they actually use kind of strip washers, kind of thin. Now, if you increase that by a little bit, it also increases the drag pressure. But remember that those work within a tolerance for the materials that's being used. So on bigger, more robust reels, you can play around more than with the smaller ones, because if you play around with the drag of the smaller ones, chances of your line breaking actually gets higher. I know because I did that. Okay, so not really something. Now, the advantage of reels that have higher max drag output rather, is pretty straightforward, and a lot of people wouldn't even reach that level. Now, for me, especially, even if I'm using this, I'm not gonna put the 14 kg that it's rated for, because at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to hold this and pull it back. So I always go for let's say for this one, I have PE4 on this, or PE3. No, PE4 on this, and then I have I think PE4 on this one as well. Considerably or comfortably in the middle of the range for these reels, and I go for capacity because that's basically what I need. I would rather have more line than more power, and the drag that I use on these would be lower than the max, because I'm the idiot that's gonna hold the rod. Okay, I'm the idiot that's gonna hold the rod, and I'm gonna be standing there holding it as the fish actually goes and tries to pull line. And it will. Okay, the object of fishing is not to remove the dentures out of fish. Because see, the thing is, if you just want to stop the fish, you shouldn't be using mono, you shouldn't be using braid, you should be using steel cable. And your reel shouldn't have drag. But it's there.
It's there for a reason. So drags are there to tire the fish out, not to pull the dentures off or remove their spine. Remember. Okay? So, use it. That's it. Now, a lot of people are thinking that, yeah, okay, do that with the tuna. And okay, I appreciate that. But see, the thing is, we fish for sport. And if your reason is something else, then that's you. But, it's called sport fishing, not fishing for a living. Yes, there are bigger reels that suit other purposes. And great, if you want to use that, then go ahead. But again, drags are there for a reason. Okay? And for me, max drags, they're just an indication of how much surface area was given to the washers, not the strength really of the reel, because like it or not, you can increase the max drag or you can decrease it. Performance doesn't mean power for the most part. F1 cars from V12s, they're running V6s and they're running faster. There's there's merit to that. Okay, there's merit to that. Anyway, so I hope this gives you a better understanding. Really, again, a lot of people use it as a metric, which I think they shouldn't. There's a lot more things to worry about when it comes to the reel. Ergonomics, ease of use, basically how it's built. You don't want it to break. The reel is kind of useless if it has like a really strong or really high max drag, and then it falls apart when you use it. There are different requirements for reels that, for me, for reels that I hold, types of fishing that I hold, I want them to be lighter. For types of fishing that require me to put them on a rod holder, heavier reels are fine. So trolling, bottom fishing, some instances for bottom fishing, let's say live baiting even, drifting, and stuff like that. Surf fishing, which I love, I can actually get away with heavier equipment because at the end of the day, I'm going to put it on a rod holder, especially now that have a hard condition. So especially now. So the lighter the gear I have when I'm jigging, and all other types of fishing, even ultralight casting, all types of fishing that I'm holding that require me to hold the rod and reel, I want it to be lighter. And guess what? Sometimes lighter reels, they don't have a lot of max drag. But if you're a big burly guy, and you're into this whole thing with heavy reels with what do you call this? Really high drag ratings and all that, great. It's your thing. But hopefully this video gives people an insight on how to choose reels, especially with the whole debate about max drag. Alrighty? So that's it. If you learned something, give it a thumbs up. Give this video a thumbs up. And then, so that a lot of people would know about this, I really encourage you guys to click on that share button. And if you're new to the channel and want to learn more, click on subscribe so that each and every single time I publish a video, you'll know. Okay, so subscribe, click on that notification bell. Alrighty. And lastly, it's not a requirement, but if you want to help this channel progress, this costs. Trust me, it costs money. So a little help from you guys, just to keep things a bit manageable on my side, click on that membership button. And it is highly appreciated. Alrighty, that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Could be boring for some people, huh? I'll see you in the next one. Class is missed.